Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Wallace. I'm an evolutionary epidemiologist with the People's CDC, here with an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we'll cover the state of global COVID, the state of U.S. COVID, and the Biden administration's apparent decision to declare COVID victory in an effort to win the midterm elections later this year. We begin with global COVID. In the graph in red, the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center reports 3.25 million new COVID cases worldwide for the week ending June 5th. The number of global weekly deaths, there in white, continues to decline, down to under 10,000 for the week, the lowest level since March 2020, when SARS-2 went pandemic. The number of vaccinations administered this week, there in green, spiked up to 277 million new shots administered worldwide. This New York Times map shows hotspots over the past week in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Australasia. Panama, Portugal, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand continue to be epicenters in average daily new cases per 100,000 population. Over the past 2 weeks, Brazil, Chile, Belize, Iceland, Finland, and Botswana hosted increases in daily new cases. Costa Rica, Ireland, Italy, Namibia, Japan, and South Korea saw declines in new cases. By this Our World in Data time series of daily confirmed COVID cases per million people, the present hotspots are trending in different directions. Taiwan and Portugal's outbreaks continue onward, also clocking in at 30% or more in test positivity there in the brown. Australia and Finland appear to have entered a decline in cases after months in epidemic cycles, although Finland is also presently testing at 30% positive. Italy and Germany appear to have their Omicron spikes under control. Panama remains in the epicenter that its neighbor Costa Rica has apparently exited. The US and Uruguay continue to host slow increases in caseloads, with US positivity approaching 20%. The case fatality rate in the US, how deadly infections are, has been in recent steady decline despite this week's slight curl upward. Panama, South Korea, and Japan have also exhibited declines in case fatalities per infection. But declines are not the case everywhere, with recent steady trends upward in deaths in Finland and the United Kingdom, and recent mortality spikes for this set of countries in Belize and India. In other words, against declarations that the Omicron variant is inherently less virulent, death loads vary across the world and are likely to depend on case definitions, public health governance, and hospital demand. We see from this evolutionary tree of COVID samples over the past 6 months that Omicron subvariants, there in yellow, but especially now in the oranges and reds, continue to explore SARS-2's evolutionary space. Compared to the last time we looked at this tree, we see growth in samples of Omicron subvariants BA2, 4, and 5. Across the Omicron group, we find molecular changes from the root of the SARS-2 tree here, numbering as high as 55 new amino acid changes and 15 deletions. In other words, evolution continues to cycle across molecular characteristics, along the way experimenting with the human immune system to the tune of over 3 million new infections a week during what new governments worldwide are treating as COVID's retreat. Turning to the US, this past week, COVID in the Northeast is in decline by cases per 100,000 population, while the rest of the country is hosting a rise in the floor of caseloads. We see this especially in the West and Southwest, but select counties along the Rockies are getting especially hit. The upper Midwest continues to host increases, with Southwest Minnesota, southern Wisconsin, and especially that growing epicenter in Illinois. Select counties across the Plains states are also hosting sharp spikes. Appalachia, Miami, Hawaii, and Alaska are all hosting considerable outbreaks of 100 infections per 100,000 population. Puerto Rico continues to host its months-long island-wide outbreak. The levels of SARS-2 detected in the wastewater that comes through our sewage plants, as reported May 22nd through June 5th, follows some of these caseload reports. The Bay Area and Colorado are reporting the same high levels we saw on the caseload map. Illinois appears fully engulfed. And of the few states reporting wastewater testing this month, North Carolina and parts of Ohio are hosting hotspots. We also see the Northeast cooling off, especially in New York State. The changes in SARS-2 detected in these sewage plants over the past 15 days show some sites around the country in red, with increases in SARS-2 detected over 1,000% or more. So while the Northeast in the previous sewage map appears to have cooled off, there remain spots that have shown sharp increases in the past couple weeks. The Midwest and North Carolina, despite hosting Omicron outbreaks for months now, also appear to be hosting new surges here and there. The Omicron variant has a reputation of being a relatively benign infection. Hospitalizations requiring an ICU bed were indeed largely flat for most of the country the past couple months. But we also see more upticks of 1% and 2% or more of ICU beds filled in the past week, indicated here in the dark green and in blue. How much more than 2%, CDC does not report. We see new ICU increases out west, even beyond what we saw a couple weeks ago. Some counties along the Rockies are seeing surges, especially in Wyoming. We see new hospitalizations in the Midwest, including South Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, northern Michigan, and parts of Ohio. In the South, hospitalizations appear up in Mississippi, Alabama, and northern Florida. Despite our characterization of an ebb in the Northeast, we see increases in ICU usage along a stripe through upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Here's the CDC's community level map, which, as we have discussed previous weeks, depends on the lagging indicator of hospital capacity. Even under that bright side of a measure, the US is increasingly moving out of a low level to medium and high exposure. We saw that to be the case in the Midwest a couple weeks ago, but also now we see that to be the case in the West Coast, Florida, counties along the Rockies, and the Carolinas. Much of the Northeast and Puerto Rico have been stepped down in community level. The CDC has hidden away on its website another marker of the state of the US pandemic. The community transmission map showing actual community transmission shows for June 6 all of the US, save parts of the Great Plains, in full transmission, even more so than a couple weeks ago. So while the community level map, that map largely in green, shows 70% of US counties under low danger, the CDC reports this community transmission map shows 78% of US counties hosting high transmission. With such transmission, we see SARS-2, like on the global stage, evolving stateside. 2 weeks ago, we saw the new BA.2.12 subvariant accounting for 58% of new US infections. Now accounts for 62% of infections. But again, in another wave of evolution, the BA.4 and 5 subvariants have arrived. They are in green. This week, the two new subvariants account for 13% of new infections. We end our report with news from the White House. In the face of such an adaptive and ongoing pandemic, the Biden administration appears to have decided to declare victory against COVID-19. Nicholas Smith of the American Mask Manufacturers Association reports that in February, the administration's poll firm, Impact Research, recommended moving beyond merely dropping mask mandates and moving toward discouraging mask use. Impact Research suggested that the administration, quote, declare the crisis phase of COVID over and push for feeling and acting more normal, end quote. In what seemed talking points from the urgency of normal campaign, the People CDC has criticized on its website, Impact Research cites learning loss at school and COVID's effects on the economy as reasons to exit COVID as a reality. Both of these issues, learning loss and economic impact, arose out of decisions the Trump and Biden administrations made in refusing to provide adequate support for communities and households during a major crisis. In other words, the failure to act before serves here as reason to fail to act now. At the same time, the impact memo continues that aiming to eliminate COVID isn't the answer. In effect, admitting COVID will remain the reality the firm also suggests the Biden administration ignore. The leaked memo follows only weeks later efforts by the CDC, other administration officials, and outside epidemiologists to warn the American people of upcoming COVID spikes, including next fall and winter, when Americans go to the very polls the Biden administration is worried about. The People CDC takes a different position. Research and the realities of the pandemic we've all faced the past couple of years repeatedly show that governance beyond electoral jockeying is required to beat COVID for good. Otherwise, we have to start a public health response all over again with each new wave and each new variant, while risking that the next strain might beat out our vaccines. In other words, beating COVID-19 is more about lining a series of programs together in a way that both tracks and anticipates each new COVID wave. So mask mandates, sheltering in place when we need to, vaccines for all, a program community health workers to visit the sick, contact tracing, but also a program of community welfare, including eviction moratoriums, hazard pay, child care support, and municipal and rural food programs. All of which in the past year, the Biden administration and Congress let lapse. Putting COVID down for good requires having someone at the wheel, steering jurisdictions through these interventions for the American people, rather than interventions that put corporate profits first. Such efforts have already been shown to work this pandemic. We saw that governance dedicated to public health across types of political system allowed people to take off their masks for real. There were mask-free rugby matches in New Zealand, mask-free raves in China, and concerts in other countries, because the virus was gone, something the US need aim for as well. And that's COVID This Week from the People's CDC. You can learn more about the People's CDC and read this week's COVID weather report at peoplescdc.org.